Some self-made stories are baloney. What about with self-publishing? Could the origin story of the YA fantasy breakout Eragon be deceptive? And what about highly successful independent authors? Shouldn't they be rewarded by traditional publishing with more favorable contracts? After all, they've done the work to build an audience that will guarantee sales. Lucky for us, Hugh Howey, who wrote Wool, is a trailblazer for hybrid publishing. There's a lot we can learn from his story. Let's start off with Eragon. What do we know about it? The author, Christopher Paolini, started writing it when he was 15. In Christopher's own words, "It took me a year to write the first draft, a year to write the second draft, and a third year to edit the manuscript with my family. We then self-published the book with the company Lightning Source. Self-publishing took a lot of time and effort, as we had to format the book ourselves, do quality checks on each book, and hand sell most of the copies, but it gave us control over all aspects of its production and marketing. Figuring out how to sell the book was a challenge. From my window I saw fields, mountains, and cows. No houses, no people. We had little money and no connection to the world of big publishers, so how could we spread the word about my story?" Some additional context. This was the early 2000s before many ebook platforms existed. Christopher continues, "My family and I created posters and flyers to help spread the word. My first events were at the local high school and library, where I spoke about and sold copies of my book. Everywhere I went, in addition to doing signings in bookstores, I always scheduled an event at a public library. I then called local newspaper, radio, and TV stations to see if they would like to interview me, which many did. Yes, it was scary and uncomfortable, but it worked. Over the period of about a year, I did over 135 presentations in bookstores, schools, and libraries, speaking about my book and inspiring young people to read and create stories of their own." You can see the draw here. A young aspiring author hits the road and sells that dream to other young writers. It also sounds like a grueling tour. 135 events is a lot in a single year. That's almost one every other day. So why would anyone question this hustle? Why are there allegations against the book truly being self-published? On his website, Jim C. Hines crashes out, as the kids say, on Eragon. Paolini's family ran a small commercial press. Eragon was not the first book published by Paolini International. Paolini International was founded in 1997, and you could make a strong argument that they are a commercial publisher, albeit a small one. On the other hand, since they were publishing the work of their son, you could also call this self-publishing. In either case, Paolini's success relied heavily on the fact that his family had 5 years of experience running a publisher and were willing to devote themselves full-time to promoting his book. Unless your family has the same experience and devotion to your book, I wouldn't count on achieving this level of success. It is true that the Paolinis owned a publishing company, but it seems very small, to the point that they may have only sold 50 books prior to Eragon. I don't think that's enough to discredit the self-publishing label. But Jim does bring up something that's very unusual about this story. His parents went all in. I don't think that's a typical experience for an aspiring author. Having your parents take you on a year-long tour is amazing, I'm glad he had that, but that's pretty unusual. It reminds me a bit of Beatrix Potter and Peter Rabbit. Her social position gave her a lot of the grace she needed to create the book and self-publish it. In the Paolini's case, it wasn't about money, it was that dedication and support, which again is amazing. You want that kind of support from your family. Most of us just don't get it. I'm just kidding. My parents have really helped me follow my dreams. They just haven't taken me on a year-long book tour. Christopher even took to Reddit to push back against this narrative that his book wasn't self-published. One user writes, "I wouldn't say his parents owned a small publishing house. His parents had previously written a book as a passion project of theirs and self-published it. Kindle on Demand wasn't a thing back then, and so they had to do all the distribution themselves. They felt this gave them some experience with the self-publishing process and put that towards their son's book." Christopher responds, "Bingo. Saying we were a small publishing house is like saying a kid running a lemonade stand is a small business owner. Might be technically correct, but it vastly overstates the situation. Prior to Eragon, my family and I sold maybe 50 books, if that." So I'm going to side with the Paolinis here. I think Eragon was self-published. It doesn't feel like a case of nepotism. Shout out to Maya Erskine. It's more like the Hanson brothers. It took them 4 years to find success, and they had the support of their family throughout that process. So how was Eragon picked up by traditional publishing and turned into a movie? A novelist, Carl Hyacin, was at one of Christopher's events. He was traditionally represented, so he brought the book to a major publisher. I think that helps reinforce that the Paolinis weren't super connected in the publishing world. It took a bit of luck for them to break through. So what can aspiring writers learn from the story of Eragon? I think there's still power to having a grassroots campaign, going to bookstores, finding connections that way. I know the marketplace has changed tremendously since Christopher released his book, and everything is now online, but there's power to being in person. I think you can benefit from connecting to fans in a more personal level, like in person. My other takeaway is how wonderful it is to have support when you're pursuing an outlandish dream. Kudos to Christopher's parents for helping him get his book published. Now let's talk about Hugh Howey and Wool. This is actually my second time recording this. I went to the bathroom and muted my mic, but didn't turn it back on. If you want 50 minutes of video of me talking about Wool, but no audio, hit up my Patreon. Prior to Wool, Hugh wrote 7 books, which continues that trend of prolific self-published authors. From an article on Writer's Digest, the opening chapters of Wool first appeared as a 99-cent ebook novella via Kindle Direct Publishing in July 2011. Howey had written the post-apocalyptic story without intending to immediately follow it up with more installments. But by October, Howey noticed Wool was eclipsing all of his previous works and was positioned to sell 1,000 copies by the end of the month. So he promptly tabled the unrelated project he'd been planning and instead focused on writing more of the Wool saga. The subsequent rapid releases of his next 4 ebook installments of Wool rocketed Hugh Howey's name to the top of Amazon bestseller lists in several categories. In January 2012, he released the Wool Omnibus, the combined 5 parts, which spent 2 weeks on the New York Times ebook fiction bestseller list and received the Kindle Book Review's 2012 Best Indie Book Award in the sci-fi fantasy category. Congratulations. By that summer, Howey was selling 20,000 to 30,000 digital copies of Wool a month and was making a monthly salary of $150,000 from ebook sales alone. He quit his day job. Part of his success is from being prolific, which seems to be a benefit on ebook platforms like Kindle. Each book acts as marketing for prior titles, and once hooked, a reader can binge on the entire series. Publishers began to take notice. You don't say. But instead of accepting the first offer that came along, Howey partnered with a literary agent, Kristen Nelson. She approached him and embarked on a mission. The pair began having conversations with publishers about the type of contract they were seeking, one that would allow Howey to broaden his reach to bookstores worldwide while still thriving as a digitally self-published author. Not surprisingly, a lot of publishers weren't even willing to discuss a print contract that didn't encompass digital rights. He saw himself as advocating for an eventual shift that might help other authors in the future. But then something else amazing and unexpected happened. Holding his ground worked. After walking away from several 6-figure advance offers and 2 7-figure advances, Howey became the first self-published author ever to be offered a print-only contract in a significant 6-figure advance by a major publisher. Simon & Schuster released Wool in both hardcover and paperback in March. This is really important, and I think a lesson for aspiring self-publishers. Be savvy about the business side of things, or defer to a trusted partner. Otherwise, you could end up like Andy Weir in The Martian with his problematic contract with the audiobook company Podium. In Weir's case, that contract didn't end up being a thorn in his side, but you don't want to take that risk. What influenced your initial decision to self-publish rather than pursue the traditional route? Largely my impatience. I went the traditional route with my first manuscript. I'd shared that manuscript with some friends and people I knew on forums, and they said, "This is as good as anything I've read in the bookstore. Don't put this out there for free. You need to submit this to publishers and try to get an agent." So I begrudgingly went that route, and I was surprised. Within weeks, I had some small publishers offering me advances. I was thrilled. But then, watching that first book get published, I realized that all the tools were available to me. There were these new digital tools, and I could do it all myself. So when I got a contract for my second book, it was a difficult decision to make, but I told the publisher that I was going to try to do it on my own. This speaks to a change in the industry. More and more traditionally published authors are expected to do heavy lifting in terms of their book's marketing. So if you're savvy in that area, the value of a publisher becomes a little less defined. When did your literary agent come into the picture? When Kristen Nelson got in touch with me, Wool had become this breakout success, and I was turning away offers of representation. I was enjoying what I was doing in the US, and I was making enough to not need a day job. But she explained that I could give the Hollywood market a much bigger attempt, and I could attack the foreign markets. Kristen has taken something that was doing really well domestically and expanded it in ways I never would have been able to. This is exactly what's drawn me to traditional representation in publishing. While copyright laws have changed dramatically since Peter Rabbit lapsed into the public domain in the US, doing business in another country can be complicated. It's an area where leaning on a professional's expertise makes a lot of sense. It can save you from the hassle of managing countless contracts. So you believe traditional publishers are becoming more open to negotiating hybrid models. I think of all the industries that have been revolutionized by digital media, publishers have done a great job of adapting. They've gone from stigmatizing self-publishing to looking at the bestsellers list to find people who aren't signed, snatching them up and giving them much fairer contracts, and embracing the fact that they can publish several books in a year and have this huge fan base they can bring with them. There's so much risk involved in publishing a book. If you can print a bestseller that's already self-published, a lot of the risk is removed. To me, this shares parallels on how the music industry has changed. There's much less development of talent. Artists frequently have an existing fan base they can leverage, and hybrid publishing is a wonderful way to reward them for building a platform. Do you feel that luck has played a role in your success? I'm uncomfortable ascribing my success to writing prowess. So much of it is timing. If I'd been doing this 5 or 10 years ago, I never would have gotten my stories out there. And if I would do it 10 years from now, maybe my stories wouldn't be good enough to compete with all the other works being self-published. I admire Hugh's genuine humility. Now that you've had experiences with both traditional publishing and self-publishing, would you say being a hybrid author is the best of both worlds? Absolutely. I not only have the great royalties that come from the dual rights, but I've been picked up by major publishers overseas. I get to work with the wonderful editors at Random House and Simon & Schuster and go on a book tour, things that I would never be able to do on my own. But being self-published means I get to produce 3 works a year. I get to price my works where they'll sell instead of pricing them so high. So there are advantages to both, and trying to pick the best from both worlds, to me, is ideal. It just requires a bit of good fortune to get to a position with your self-publishing career that you can get into the traditional world. And it also requires some bravery from traditionally published authors who want to become hybrid to break out and do some self-publishing. Some New York Times bestselling authors are now self-publishing in order to augment their earnings, and I think that's brilliant. It's also a wonderful opportunity for an established author to really branch out and try something different. If you're known for a specific style or genre, self-publishing is an opportunity to do something wildly different. Earlier in the article, Hugh cites Colleen Hoover, best known for It Ends With Us, as an example of a hybrid success. What advice can you offer to authors who are trying to build a hybrid career? If you're already traditionally published, examine your contract and see if self-publishing is something you can do. It's a wonderful way to build your readership. My recommendation to anyone who's got a backlist or a career in a traditionally published model is to break out and test the waters in self-publishing. It's not going to do anything but good for your career. For those who want to self-publish from the start, embrace that. There's no stigma from publishers, so if you want to become a hybrid author, the goal is to get as many works published as possible, high-quality stuff. Build an author platform and trust that 10 years from now, you have 20 works available and one takes off and a publisher will approach you. You have as good a chance of winning a publisher over by getting your sales going through your self-published works as you do submitting to the slush pile. This is motivating for an aspiring author like myself. The only risk I'd consider from this approach is a self-published work is unlikely to get republished unless it's a breakout. If you're really weighing the pros and cons of self-publishing, maybe you're earning $20 or $50 a month with 6 or 7 titles you have out there, and you're busy writing your next work, you're not thinking about landing an agent, you're not writing query letters, you're writing stories. And meanwhile, your ebook sales might be paying your cable bill. You have them out there where readers can find them, and maybe one of them will take off. That's something I advocated before Wool had any sort of popularity, so it's not just anecdotal. The fact that it worked, I think, lends credence to the idea of it working for others. Howey's thoughts resonate for me here. If you've been following my printing press series, you'll be aware of how much time I'm spending honing my submission package for querying. I've learned a lot during that process, especially in respect to marketing, but would my time be better spent writing? It's a difficult question to answer. My biggest takeaway from Howey and other self-publishing success stories is that there seems to be 2 major pathways: building a platform over time by releasing a lot of books, or by being a marketing genius. What should you do if you're not prolific or especially savvy in positioning your book for success? Asking for a friend.